I'm with Geoff Pearman, Managing Director of Partners in Change, and he's going to talk to us today about his experiences working with businesses and associations and individuals around the ageing workforce. Geoff, tell us a little bit more about your business.
Yeah, David, I've been working full-time for the last 4 years in Australia and New Zealand, working with companies, helping them develop strategies to adapt to the ageing of their workforces, but also to look for opportunities for new business around the ageing of the population. It's an exciting program. I guess a lot of the work that's been done in this area has been focused on large companies, and yet we know that about 97% of businesses are SMEs.
What are the kind of, I guess, things that they can apply or change their approach to this area?
Well, one of the things that we're really clear about, David, is that this isn't a training program for individuals. It's first and foremost an organisational development program. So we don't register individuals, we register a company. The output is the development of a mature age workforce strategy and action plan. Things that they're going to be doing back in the workplace, and hence the coaching at the end is sitting down with them, sitting down with their managers and working through their particular challenges and what they're going to do.
Do you think employers, from your experience in Australia, are a little bit more ahead of the curve in respect of how they're dealing with an ageing workforce, or is there still lessons to be learned here?
Oh, look, David, it is like two different countries, and maybe we'll come back to the differences between the two countries. But I still think that I'm still dealing with, in Australia, with employers who are at the leading edge, who are prepared and willing to look at this. Recently I got to interview 4 people who have been on the program, and I think we need to listen to them.
WorkSafe Tasmania has a staff of around 100. We found that 30 odd staff were over 55. And the main feedback from that group was that they hoped to remain in the workplace. They wanted to remain active and be involved with training and pretty much be treated just like everybody else.
What were some of the policy or practice things that the older workers were looking for that would be important to them?
Oh, flexibility was the main thing, being able to cut back on working hours and be more involved with family and other things, but at the same time remain an active and valued member of WorkSafe Tasmania. Yeah, I think the main fear was being left out of the picture.
From your perspective, what do you think those attendees have taken back to make it successful for them in their business, and more particularly around their employees?
I think they've taken back a number of things. First of all is they've taken back a heightened awareness of what some of the challenges are. So some of the participants have simply said the scales fell off their eyes. They weren't aware that ageing populations was such a challenge, and it was impacting on the workforce in the way that it is and could potentially impact. So heightened awareness. I think one of the other things that comes out of it being a cluster-based model where you've got companies from all sorts of industries. The last one, we had an aluminium smelter, we had a salmon farm, we had a council, we had a disability services provider, just to mention a few. But the interaction that starts to happen between those companies around the challenges they've got. So they take back all sorts of new ideas and approaches to problem solving from the program.
And then their employees, what do they then adopt or take out of that work to either improve their role, but more importantly dealing with ageing themselves?
Oh yeah, I think there's always 2 levels in the work that I do. There's always the level of working with the company, but sitting in the room are people who are ageing themselves or in that category, and if not, they're vicariously doing work on behalf of their parents. But I think the thing that often is coming out of it is they're then putting in place interventions in the workplace that are making a difference, both for the company but also for the employees. So at one level it might be running workshops for employees to help them manage transitions better. At another level, it might be looking at succession and knowledge continuity. And at another level, and we'll have an example of this in a few minutes, it'll be doing ergonomic solutions to actually help deal with some of the health and wellbeing challenges that they're facing.
So our workforce is fairly typical in local government. 95 workers out of a headcount of 220 are over the age of 50. Our staff on the outdoor workforce are still doing fairly heavy physical work. It's still quite manual in nature. So one of our discussions was around early intervention strategies for manual handling, and our cutter crew are the staff out there who swing those brush cutters out 8 hours a day. It's very intense, very manual work. and we have had a number of injuries from that type of work. So we've looked at a number of different strategies. We're hiring in an all-terrain remote control mower. She's a fairly big beast, and it just takes a man on the or a person on the end of a sort of little black box to actually move it.
That certainly cuts down the swinging
it certainly
and the
does,
physical
yeah.
work.
But there's a whole range of strategies, and we're working our way through that at the moment.
What do you think has made this program so successful, and what are the things that we can take out of it that we could perhaps apply here in New Zealand?
Look, David, I think there's a few things that have made it successful. The first thing is that we've got local sponsorship and local support. So in the case of Tasmania, it's been driven by WorkSafe Tasmania, and it's also been driven by the Employer of Choice program. In South East Queensland, it was driven by an employment agency there who had a wide client base. So I think that's the first thing, is that there are people who get it and want to promote it. I think the second thing is that the program is absolutely focused on their business and the real issues that they're facing, and dealing with problem solving around things like succession, health wellbeing, safety, retention of knowledge, etc. So real issues.
And with the SMEs, that has got to be the number one priority. How do they actually transition out of their business that they love and are passionate about, but maybe ultimately can't continue?
And I did one cluster which was just for building construction industry, and a number of those were just owner-operators, and business succession was a big issue for them. But if I go into a larger organisation, the issue is actually finding those people who are in mission-critical positions and identifying the risks that sit around them and doing succession. What I've discovered is that there's no cookie-cutter solutions to the issues around ageing workforces. We can talk about flexibility, but for a city council, that's quite different to what it is for a smelter, to what it is for a salmon farmer, to what it is for a disability services provider. And what we've got to help them do is find the solutions in their business that work for them.
And it was interesting talking to the other people who are involved in the cluster that everybody had the same patterns. But one of our major concerns is the lack of knowledge and experience that we will lose as a company when our ageing workforce do retire. And we realised we didn't know. We didn't understand when they were going to retire, what they were hoping to achieve, did they want to retire at all. We've had a look at what we can do as far as keeping, as Penny was saying, keeping our senior staff in to do mentoring roles. So both whilst they're still working with us and afterwards. One of the big projects we'll be working on is an alumni group where we can keep the connection and the conversations happening with our senior staff once they have retired. A big pattern, a big fear right across all the companies is that loss of connection once someone retires, and the loss of that social network that they have at work. So we're hoping to keep that going even after people have retired.
What do you think your personal views are, what New Zealand should be looking to adopt or apply to kind of manage what this challenge is going to be?
Well, I think first of all, David, just to clarify, I am working with companies in New Zealand, so I'm working with companies in both countries. But I think I've got a unique perspective on that, and there's some things we can learn, and probably three that I'd want to highlight.
Sure.
I think that what we're needing in New Zealand is a much more mature conversation at a national level. One that is around reimagining what life and work is about after 50-55. We're not having that conversation. There's a lot of myths out there, a lot of misunderstandings about this. For example, I was recently in a regional area, and in 4 meetings the issue came up of older workers displacing younger workers. Now we know that that is not the case, but we need education and awareness here in this country. And I think you know, you've heard from Deb Whitman today, and I think we've got the opportunity to build on what they're doing around disrupting our traditional views of ageing. I think the second thing that we're needing to see much more in this country that we do see in Australia is leadership at the government level. And this is not a discussion about the age of entitlement to superannuation. I think that's a separate issue. We need a discussion at a national level from government around the changing landscape, and that's all major political parties. More and more people are staying on at work through choice. Many are going to be staying on through necessity, and we're not even having that conversation. I think it's interesting, David, that we are focused almost exclusively on youth unemployment, and yet we know that there are just as many people who are registered as job seekers between 55 and 64 as there are between the ages of 18 and 24. I think there's a third thing that we need to be doing much more effectively, and that's actually engaging with employers. I'm not a fan of what's happened in Australia, where a strong focus has actually been around discrimination and participation. I think it has its place, but I don't think you get the traction you want by beating up on employers. What we need to do is engage with employers who every day are trying to run businesses and on the whole genuinely work with their people. Helping them work with the tradesman whose knees have given out at the age of 55. Helping them deal with the person who's got a chronic health problem that's now impacting on safety. Helping them support the employee who's actually got onset of early dementia, and that is increasingly going to be a challenge in our workplaces. All of those things I think are places where we need to be engaging and supporting employers to do it better with employees.